Hi everybody, it's a real pleasure to be part of CitSen today. This is actually my first CitSen, it's very exciting. And thanks to Rafia. So I'm on sort of a similar track to Rafia in terms of the NIHR research track, but I'm a big jump behind, and Rafia is actually one of my research mentors, which has been lovely. So I'm a Band 7 speech and language therapist. I work in Hackney in northeast London, and my particular area is mainstream primaries. So I'm one of those generalist specialists. And as I said, I also work part-time as a clinical academic research fellow, and that's linked to a master's in research at UCL, which I'm rapidly approaching the end of, which does mean a hand-in date, which is quite interesting. So as Abby said, I'll do a couple of mini presentations. The first one I'm going to talk about is Wixit, because that's hopefully interesting, but to me, the less exciting one. So we'll get that bit done. And then I'll move on to talking about my big tech adventure, which really was a big adventure back in the days when we used to travel around the world. Yeah, and I'll leave some time for questions. Okay, I'm just going to get my PowerPoint slides up. Go. Can you see that, Sheila?
Yeah, that's great.
Lovely. Thank you. Okay. So, I'm sure we probably have, I know we have quite a few researchers in the room because I've seen them, but for anyone who's not done any research, certainly recently, the point of my online forum was to facilitate patient and public involvement, otherwise known as PPI in research terms. So obviously that's something quite different to most lay people. So PPI, I'm no expert in it, but in terms of my own learning in the last couple of years from UCL, so it's been seen as increasingly important in research, and it's the idea that you involve your patients and their families at all the different stages of your research. So it's not just about disseminating out to them at the end, it's really about co-creating with them. And the model of best practice for that would be involving them at the very earliest stages and actually creating your research idea, but then also including them at all the other points so that they're really working on a par with you. So it's trying to break down that hierarchy, I guess, between us, us being the researchers and the people who are doing research on. It's trying to bring those people into our side so we're all doing it together, which is something we're very familiar with as therapists in terms of our own practice as well. So my key PPI groups for my research, so that is who's delivering our SALT interventions in primary schools, how are those decisions being made, and also how are those interventions being supported. And it's felt like, to me, this was the most important research I could do. It took me a really long time to refine my research idea, but based on my 12 years of practice, these felt like really, really important questions to address. So my key PPI groups are the children themselves, parents and families of those children, also the teaching assistants in schools, SENCOs and SALTs, and probably a bunch of other ones, but those are my core groups. There's a bit of debate in the PPI field about exactly what or who constitutes a group, because some argue that it's actually all about the families and the patients themselves, but for the purpose of this research, it was actually really important for me to hear from all those other groups as well, even though they're fellow professionals too. So I did do some face-to-face PPI, which was really interesting. So I did that with a full LSA team from one of my big London schools, and also a young advocacy group in Hackney who were linked to one of our facilities in Hackney, which is real multidisciplinary. And they're a group of teams, many of whom have had speech and language intervention while they were at primary school. So it was really interesting to get their views and include that. But then, so I am a Hackney therapist. We have, I don't know quite how our NHS funding compares with other parts of the UK, but certainly it's very small. So we have a very small amount of funding that comes through the NHS for our schools work. And then we have a very large amount of funding that comes from the schools themselves. We're a really big schools commission service. What I wanted to do with my research, even though it's very much as a junior researcher, I didn't want to do my research focused on a part of the country that's so non-representative of what's happening in a lot of the rest of the country. One of the challenges I think for us as SALTs is the fact that a lot of research that's out there doesn't feel very translational to our practice. So we can read it, we can take a lot of good information from it, but if it's so unrealistic that we can't then implement it, it's quite frustrating. So I was trying to avoid that. Yeah, and I didn't want to just then expand that to London and also have, you know, a London focus, because, you know, as I suppose you would imagine, we get a lot more funding. There's a little chart there that I got. It's from a few years ago, but it's the most up to date. And looking at the dark blue is the amount of higher education funding, and the yellow is to do with research funding. So we do get quite a lot more. And bearing in mind that's comparing London as a city to whole regions of the rest of the country. So I was left to consider, if I want to reach out to people across the UK, which did feel fairly ambitious for my master's project, what's the best way to reach those people, and in particular the parents and families of the primary children that we work with? Also bearing in mind, as I think has been mentioned earlier, this was all pre the lockdown, so this wasn't a time when everybody was online and into tech in quite the same way as we are now. So this led me to the idea of the online forum, and I did a bit of research on this and came up with some really helpful papers. There was a particularly useful one, which was this one. So obviously down towards the other end of the age spectrum to the children I'm working with, but it was incredibly helpful, I guess in some ways because it didn't make assumptions about people's tech abilities who were using it. It was a King's College research project about people in palliative care and their families, and they had a lot to say about the forum. It was great. They had so much to critique and praise, and I looked at a lot of these recommendations and tried to include those as much as possible, because they were really helpful, and they were really, as I guess they were PPI driven, they were really practical suggestions that I could then include in my forum. So just before I show you, we'll pop onto the forum in a sec, but these are some things, because you can tell me if you think that's true, these are some things that I think went well. So these are from the recommendations from that paper. So that the intention of the research is really clear on the landing page, that it's warm, friendly, conversational, doesn't use any jargon. We're used to trying to do that. That the pictures on this was a particular one that a lot of people talked about. The pictures had to actually relate to the people, you know, who were involved in the research, not the researchers and the researchers' establishments. So that was something I felt quite strongly about. That it should be colourful and inviting, and to make it clear that those people are really needed, that they're not being invited as an extra measure, that they're essential to making the research successful. So let's take a little look. I'm just going to move over to the website. Okay, can you see that all right? Yeah. Sheila, can you see that okay?
Yes, I can see that, yeah.
Great. Sorry, it's strange speaking into the quiet. Okay, so this is my website. So a little scroll down. They can contact me on here directly. Tried to make it, I mean, the theme I went for was kind of coffee house chill out, you know, so just try and make it warm and inviting. It's a really simple intro. I really tried to think about my wording. Very brief bit, broken into chunks about what the research is about. And these are the pictures that I tried to use to make it feel really about the families and the schools, and that reflection that we're doing it as a collaborative project. But not too much information. And then there was an opportunity here, which was really nice, to include some of the videos. So some things like with Rabble that I just thought would be really nice for parents to know. Then this one, Aussie Story. So that's actually the son of someone who joined the forum, who's really active. Some of you probably know Eileen. It's lovely to include those. A nice quote. Every website needs a quote. And then a little bit about events and some contact details. So that's the basic landing page. And then for people to go into the forum, the point was then they needed to be members if they wanted to join this bit. So that will take us to a nice login page. That felt quite important, even though it's obviously a public sphere, so anyone in theory could sign up. I was still, can I remember my login details? Okay. My computer saves these. Yeah, good. Okay, So this is the forum. I won't go into the particulars because I guess there's a certain level of confidentiality about that, but just to show you what kinds of questions have been thrown out. So I had this sense of, this was, I guess, the most popular one. Please introduce yourself. It was really great to hear people's stories. And then what I tried to do is, from the literature, come up with some core areas of, as a starting off for discussion points, and strongly encourage people to start their own discussion threads on here. Only one mum took me up on that, which was great. But yeah, so that's one of those where I was trying to facilitate it, but it wasn't happening that much. So you can see here, these are the comments. These are how many likes, and these are how many views people have had. You can see, I guess, a lot of that activity of me. Okay, just to give you a hint, you can have a little look at that later if you're interested. So, go back to... Okay, so things that I try to include with varying degrees of success in the forum. So things that were recommended but didn't necessarily work that well. Navigation for new users. I mean, on the whole, I think people did fine. We have about 45 people on there, and I think the vast majority got on. Obviously, I don't know all the ones who tried and failed to get in, but I had a couple of emails like, I don't quite understand how to log in or do this. So it obviously could have been clearer. Having a discussion of those shared experiences, I guess, with the technology when people are starting to use it. I did have a thread for that, as in like, help, tech crisis, but actually nobody took me up on that or started talking about it. So again, I'm not sure whether that was because no one had any problems. Engaging enough to compete with other commitments. So with the forum overall, we had a really positive take up in the first months. And there were, you know, new members coming through, people looking at the website all the time, loads and loads of new threads. And then it started to get a little bit quieter. And then unfortunately with the coronavirus and the lockdown and everything, it just kind of went completely dead, which frankly, I understand. You know, people have got quite a lot going on, and I guess this was just one thing too many for now, but we got a lot done before that happened. Maintaining momentum, I think part of that, but something I can definitely learn a lot more about for next time. And empowering everyone to initiate. So I tried to really encourage people to do that, but that didn't happen that much. So people were very responsive to the things that I put up there. Yeah, and that as part of it, making sure it's PPI led. I mean, I think part of that is coming in at that right at the beginning of that stage of research and making sure that people come up with the idea with you. And I think that's always the hardest bit as the researcher, you know, because it's those delicate maneuvers. It was interesting what Rafi was saying as well about the parent ideas about her research. So things that I didn't do this time, so I guess these are things that I just didn't get around to doing. Making a little video, particularly about maybe like how to get into the forum. I think that's a brilliant idea. Offering training in the different research methods. So I didn't do that this time, kind of because it didn't really feel appropriate based on people's responses, but I think it would have still been a good invitation. And also youth involvement. I did try to do some of this. Obviously I did my face-to-face with youth involvement, but whether it was because I should have had a separate forum for youth, I was looking into, I had an advocate who's really strong, who was initially quite keen to maybe set some of that up, but I think he probably got very busy with other competing things and that didn't happen, but that's definitely something for next time. This is what I used to build the website. So Wix ADI. I don't know if anyone's ever used it before. I hadn't really I've seen ads for Wix, but I hadn't really looked into it before I did this website. The other go-to would have been WordPress. There's no particular reason I went with Wix. I just, so it's artificial design intelligence, and it's, in my opinion, absolute magic. I mean, I think the website aesthetic is lovely, not to talk up my own website, but I'm saying that because Wix ADI did a lot of that for me. So I obviously had the content, but in terms of the color schemes and the way it's formatted and the design, it's brilliant artificial intelligence, how much it helps you with what you're after. And then for the images themselves, I used raw pixel mostly, because they are copyright free images, and they have some really nice pictures in there too. They're quite politically trying to move away from some of the stereotypical stuff that comes up first on Google Images, which I also very much support. There's another one I found recently, which is Pexels, which is sort of similar in terms of being just available. So to conclude my first mini bit, I think there's a lot of potential in using a website and online forum for all manner of things, but definitely as a researcher, sometimes I think about people's theses, and obviously they've had the opportunity to do various impact projects, but then how just an incredible amount of work kind of gets lost somewhere, you know, on the internet on a scholarly search. Whereas if you had something like a website where you could update it and you could have conversations on there, I think it has a lot to offer. So one of the things I reflected on is that it does feel a bit more cozy. I mean, I use social media a lot, particularly Twitter, and it's great for those interactions and networking and sharing, but then you lose all the posts somewhere in the, you know, they're all saved, but somewhere in the ether ultimately. Whereas on the online forum, you get that back and forth, it's all held there. And you've also got that coziness of having a little bit of, you know, being a member or a non-member to actually get into the forum. It's a grounding point. It's been so useful when people are interested in the research that I can give them a little bit of information, something I feel is really relevant to them. And then if they're more interested, I can guide them to the website. And then if they're more interested, they might actually join the forum. So it's been great to have that and not constantly be trying to share lots of information at once. The accessibility, Abby talked about this in our meeting today, but thinking about the fact that it's online, for the ease of not having to travel, and the colour and interest you can add compared to sort of, you know, trying to read an academic paper or get people interested in that. And you can constantly allow it to grow and evolve. You know, there's a lot of changes, and the Wix ADI also, you can keep playing with it. There's so much scope for that. I didn't mention, I think, but also the Wix ADI, it sets it up very nicely for using a desktop, but also using a mobile, which I felt was quite important for the parents and the young people, that they could access it very smoothly on a mobile device. And you can play with that too, to make sure it's really smooth. So yeah, so probably some of you are more familiar with WordPress. I really love the aesthetic of WordPress actually, but those would be my particular recommendations. And in terms of time frame, I mean, I suppose it probably took days to write, but not weeks. And I don't really have any background experience in web design, and in terms of coming up with something I was happy with. So I would strongly recommend giving it a go. Okay, can you open up to some questions about that first bit? I'm just going to stop the share.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. I think we've just got time for one question before we move on to the other bit, to make sure we can fit everything in. We've had a question from Alison Ferris to say, was there a large financial outlay for the website?
Oh, good question. Yeah, no, you can set up a free website with Wix, including the ADI and using all of its features. I ended up using just one level up, which was about £120 for a year, which gives you the pro version. And the only major perks are you get to then write your own website name, which felt quite helpful. And also you get more bandwidth, whatever that means. I thought it might be helpful for video and things like that.
That's great, thank you. There's a couple of other questions on the chat, but if it's okay, what I'll ask you to do is to come back to those after the during the coffee break or a little bit later on.
Problem.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is very interesting. Just as a side note, I use WordPress extensively, and yes, I use that one because it's relatively easy to use. But I think it's good to know. It was really helpful to hear the amount of time it took you as somebody who's, you know, not done loads of programming before, that you were able to come up with an attractive site and an effective site with a few days.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you can come up with a functional site. I think otherwise, even if you're creating it yourself, but it's the way that Wix just basically does spin a magic wand on what you tried to put on there, and you're like, oh, okay. It's really nice. Okay, so let's start with my second one.
Thanks so much. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes for this next one, if that's okay, and then I'll give you a heads up when we're running short on time, if that's okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so next bit is about my tech adventure in the US. So this was funded by the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. A much smaller application than the NIHR one. I'd really recommend it. They have a current pause on their applications for understandable reasons, but if you have a look at their website, there's all kinds of things you can apply for, and they fund a lot of people. About 150 people every year go on a big Churchill Fellowship trip, and it's really exciting. You can do virtually anything as long as you are committed to bringing it back to help the UK. Okay, so the tech evolution. I'm talking to tech converts here on the whole, hopefully, but I was thinking about the fact that there are lots of good things about the tech evolution, things we can all enjoy, things from different times. There are also quite a lot of bad things, things that are terrifying or things that we just wish hadn't evolved. And then there are just the really ugly things that we experience on a day-to-day basis that kind of make us scream. And I think it's really helpful to remember that, especially as we are potentially the tech converts and sometimes have to try and encourage other people to believe in or buy into the idea that we can use tech really positively in our therapy. So I went to the USA a whole year ago now when things were safe and we had no idea of what was coming. I met with lots of different people, mostly social enterprises, tech developers, researchers, and community groups. So obviously I'm just going to share a couple of nuggets with you today of the things that really inspire me the most. So I'll be interested just to ask, can I see people? Oh no. I was going to ask, I can't do this at the same time, but I'm thinking about the gamers in the room, and I'm actually really curious, maybe we can talk about it later or in the chat, but whether there's a few more gamers as people who are interested in technology. There was maybe one or two, and annoyingly just the men in my own trust when we talked about this, but I'm a big gamer, and I think sometimes, sorry, I've gone to the wrong slide there. I think sometimes, you know, people might need a little nudge in the direction of how exciting gaming can be before they even think about where we could take that idea in really exciting ways. So I'm just going to show you a quick 1-minute intro to this game, which I found quite fascinating. Hoping it won't be too loud on your screens. Can you see that, Sheila?
Yeah.
Lovely.
I'm sure my mom was just trying to protect me. Now that there's only one of us left, I thought it was time I heard the stories. But now I'm worried the stories themselves might be the problem. Maybe we believed so much in a family curse, we made it real. But it had to end one way or another.
A little bit dark for a sunny Monday afternoon. I wanted to show you something that just had that feeling of where it's really powerfully narrative driven. It has nothing to do with shooters. It's really imaginative. Sorry, stop that from going again. But it has nothing to do with shooters, and yeah, where games can be really exciting and a potential learning tool. So one of the groups that I met with when I was in New York was Games for Change, and they're a social enterprise. They work with really underprivileged schools in New York, which is one of the reasons I was really drawn to them. And they run a program where they take a teacher from each of those schools, teach them basic coding skills, and the teacher then goes back into the schools and teaches the children, and the children then use those coding skills to work on games that promote positive social change. So things like environmental action or positive mental health. And they come together at regular points to do game jams where they all sort of throw in their ideas and start developing them a bit more. And then they have their festival once a year where they have a huge competition and they have some winners. This year, the festival will actually be online and it's free to join. So if anyone's interested in this kind of area, I'd really recommend registering. I don't know if they have a cap, but there were a lot already registered when I had a look the other day. So I guess I'm thinking about, it was a fascinating conversation that I had with them, but there was definitely something about how even these incredibly creative social enterprises are still designing games with a neurotypical child in mind. And that feels a little bit challenging in terms of where the potential lies for these games and for tech, and for what Rafia was talking about how maybe some of the children we work with are at least as much as average children drawn to this area. And I think there's so much potential if we could include some elements of that. Like, for example, with most games, you could go in at an easy, moderate, or difficult level as a gameplay element. And why not go in as an easy, moderate, or difficult level as a language element? And then they could gradually work their way up. And it would be incredibly motivating for them once they're already familiar with the story. So that is an idea that I find really exciting. And then this is an example of where it does happen in practice. I'm sure almost all of you will be familiar with Minecraft. I haven't played it. I find the pixelated look a bit strange, but it's by all accounts a brilliant and somewhat addictive creation game. And then there are some really amazing adaptations that have gone on with Minecraft. So one with iMine, where it's using eye tracking movements to play, and another one which is Ortcraft, where it's a world within a world, a bit like Eva Park, where it's facilitated to be safe for children with autism, and so they need to like apply to join. But it's a huge community, and it's just very gently moderated to make sure everyone in there is safe and protected from any difficult interactions that they might have had on the main online one. So I think that's wonderful, but my point would be, why did we have to then have reactive measures to these games? Is that not something we could have jumped in on earlier and created them from the beginning in terms of a universal design? You know, did we need to have children with autism being bullied in the main online forums in order to create a response to that? So that's, you know, an area I'm really, really interested in. And finally, I feel like no visit to the US would have really been complete without visiting the MIT Media Lab. So I don't know if people are familiar. If you're ever feeling uninspired on a work afternoon, just have a quick look at their website. I've got it in the notes here. The kind of work they're doing, to say it's mind expanding, it seems like their creativity knows no bounds at the Media Lab. So I met with a couple of people, which I'll talk about very briefly, but Jaya is working on a fluid interfaces project. And she's looking at the children with autism who are non-verbal but are using vocalizations to communicate. So she's looking at using machine learning where in their familiar environments with their familiar caregivers like their parents or some other familiar caregiver, when the child is making vocalizations, the caregiver can attach a label to those vocalizations that's picked up by that machine learning device. And then over time, the idea would be that the device is actually learning what those different vocalizations mean. So when that child is then in a different setting, maybe with unfamiliar people or a new caregiver or a new school setting, it's like an interpretation device, which I think is a really fascinating field to be working in. And finally, this other really amazing guy, Pat P, who's created Wearable Wisdom. And the essence of that is it's a wearable and it's got tech embedded in it. He uses sunglasses. And the idea is that you can pose a question to a particular wise being, anyone from Einstein to Steve Jobs, and the computer will do a rapid search of all of the literature that's available from that individual person and then give a response based on something that they might have said. So it's really ambitious, but I think so relevant for some of our children who really struggle in those social situations or struggle to know what to do and also struggle a lot with reading and writing. So they've got this verbal pathway they could use. And I was thinking, how thrilling would that be as a therapy approach where you're coming up with a question, you're choosing who they want to present it to, and then you're working through the possible answers together. It would be really, really exciting. And I'm thrilled at the idea that those could form part of our therapies of the future. So I'd highly recommend anyone who's at all keen to have a look at that website. And I'm really excited about the potential that it holds from us, and like particularly our CITSEM members, where we're perhaps the people, say, going and convincing those other people about how great this can be. And I think we've got so much we can contribute with our particular expertise and skills to all of these areas. But one thing that is key is that we actively get involved, because as we know, no one really understands what we do. So if we don't put ourselves out there and say, you know, these are the areas that I can support and work on, then, you know, these social enterprises and these wonderful things that are happening, they won't know about us and what we can bring to those teams, which I think would be fantastic. Okay, that is me. I'm gonna stop my share.
Thank you, Jenny. I'd just like to ask everyone to unmute themselves momentarily to give you another little round of applause, please. We've got some lovely non-vocal waving there from Lynn. Thank you. Great. So I've got a comment in the chat here for you, Jenny. Thank you for that. Sarah said, I love the idea of games for good and the fact they empower teachers to program and thereby empower students. And I love the idea of language levels in games as well.
Yeah, if anyone wants to collaborate on a kind of research project for that, I just think that would be fascinating. There's so much scope to work with there. And
oh, there you go, an option for collaboration there. Jenny, did you can you mention your Twitter handle so that people can get in touch with you?
Oh yes, sorry, I didn't quite get onto that slide. That's my final slide. So I'm at Jenny H Ray, which is just spelled R-A-Y. But it is on my final slide that will be coming out later. And I've also got both my emails on there, my Learning Trust and my NHS email. So you're very welcome to get in touch. I'd love to hear from you.
That's fab, thank you. And then we've got one from Molly here, which says, there are some incredible options available on some games now, which I think could be much further advertised or promoted. For example, you can change the colour displays for those with different types of colour blindness. Also, you can reduce visual or auditory distractions or adjust the balance of music, noise, voice, or chat for those who require more or less stimulations.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, and those are those really interesting examples. And I guess though it does rely on parents, for example, being willing to introduce those games and thinking that they're appropriate for the children and being on board, thinking they're fascinating and not, there's still, I think, a really pervasive feeling that video games are, insert your adjective, but not on the whole really positive. And I think they definitely can be.
Channel. And then finally from Suzanne Murphy, how did you promote your website?
Prolifically on social media. Anyone who does follow me on social media might have seen quite a few posts over the last few weeks. But I shared it, so both on Twitter and Facebook, and shared it at work and through any other more informal channels that I have. But I think social media, and certainly in conversations with other researchers as well, social media in particular, Twitter, seems to be the strongest one where you have actually feedback from other people and they tap into it.
Lovely. Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. If we could have another little round of applause or wavy thing for Jenny, that would be lovely.
Thank you.